Stress is something that can regularly impact our life. Stress of how to pay the mortgage, how to deal with the kids, what school to send them to, how to respond to our partners. All these kind of things can add to stress in our life, and that can build and build and build until finally we explode. But are there ways we can deal with stress? Are there ways we can identify situations? Are there ways we can diffuse the situation before we even get to a state of where it's going to explode? We explore how to manage stress with Dr. Laura Ellick in this podcast.
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.Care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Laura Ellick about stress, about how stress grows, how to manage stress, and how to diffuse stress within yourself and within a stressful situation. G'day, Laura. Good to see you again. Happy New Year, as we've been discussing before we hit record.
Absolutely. Happy New Year to you. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, no, and lovely to hear that you had a good time. You mentioned that your daughter made sure that you're awake to see that, and I had a relaxing New Year myself, as we were talking about. Didn't really go out or do much, just rolled through. But we had 2 New Years, and having a bit of fun there. But we were talking for the viewers. Well, if you're watching, yes, because we're recording it and it's also an audio. We were talking about that there was a shooting to do with the Lunar New Year that just happened, and from what I understand, from what you're saying, is it right that it was a person felt left out and was stressed, or there was stress related to that?
Yeah. Clearly, there was some underlying issues. The story always comes out afterwards that you find that someone had been struggling with mental or emotional issues for a while, and there's always like that last incident that sort of sends somebody over the edge. And as you and I were talking about before, it's so amazing the ways that people choose to deal with stress, that it has to get to this extreme. Like there are 5,000 different things that you can do before you get to that point where you hit somebody or hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. Just a lot of different things that you can do, and people, I still think it goes to the fact that undiagnosed mental illness is still an issue, that there's a stigma, especially in certain communities, and people just don't get the help that they need.
So how do we, from that perspective, because it seems really pertinent to talk about that now, as to how do we deal with stress, how do we identify stress, and what steps we can take? Because you said that there's 5,000 different ways of addressing it before you get to an extreme level. Is it a case of identifying that you're feeling stressed to start with, and how would you identify that stress is starting to get to a situation where you might need help?
I think there's a cultural thing, and I'd be really interested to hear how it is in your country. But there's this idea of being stoic, and that I don't need any help, and that I can handle everything. And I see it in certain pockets of people that I work with, where it's like, no, just give me more, I can manage it. until we get to the point where, not that it's too late to ask for help, but we feel we're so beyond that we don't even know where to go to look for help. And so, at a cultural level, we sort of have to change our ideas and understand that it's okay to lean on other people.
Yeah, there definitely is that culture. There's certainly from the perspective of specifically men as well, where men are taught not to. Well, and we were having this discussion before. I was having a discussion with some other people because that issue of are men taught to not ask for help, to be strong, which means don't express emotions, which I always found a bit weird because that's not how I grew up. And it certainly wasn't the environment I grew up in the sense of as a young adult as well. Because I mean, I ended up getting posted to. I joined the army and I got posted to the SAS, which is the Australian Special Forces. So it's the best of the best as far as the attacking force or defensive force, whichever way you want to look at it. But these guys were really tough. But what I found for me when I was there, I mean, they were tough, but none of them had a problem talking. When they had a problem, they never had an issue going and asking someone for help. They were able to express their emotions. And I had this similar sort of thing we dealt with the police as well, with the tactical response groups. The people in those groups mostly were men, and they also never if they had an issue, they didn't have that stoic approach. They went and said, okay, I've got an issue. We need to deal with that. So I always found it really weird that there was this thing where it was not talking about it. It just seemed strange to me. So I was always wondering about that link, and I was thinking about, is it something that's stereotypical that's put into us on movies, because movies are generally not a reflection of real life, and you've got your Arnold Schwarzenegger type characters that are really tough, but they're, whereas that's not real life. Do we need to have more of that? Is that the common thing? Because I said I'm a bit confused. I always found it a bit confusing, and I know it exists. I know, there is that thing where you have that stoic approach. You don't express your feelings. You don't talk about the stress you're having. But do we need to have more realistic conversations about that, saying, hey, what you see in the movies is not real life? Is that part of that problem, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's also a stigma and really a misunderstanding that somebody who is experiencing stress or experiencing anxiety, it's not an impaired individual, right? Even somebody who
No,
is
not at all.
experiencing even someone who's experiencing some mild depression, right? And if you look in certain subsections, let's look at professional sports, for example, or let's look at lawyers or doctors. If you're a doctor and you report to another doctor or report to your supervisor that you're feeling depressed or you've been experiencing anxiety, you're now under the microscope for potential for someone to call you an impaired professional. So if you're an athlete and you are crying on the field because you got really hurt, just think about being an NFL player and, crying on the field. Now we had an experience here. I don't know if you know about it with the Buffalo Bills and the Bengals, where we had a player go into cardiac arrest on the field.
No, I don't know about that. Yeah.
Okay. So he went into cardiac arrest on the field after being just a hit to the chest. It was like a 1 in a million kind of thing. And he dropped on the field and they needed to do CPR and revive him and all of that. And he left the field. And all of the NFL commentators for several days after were really struck by how the NFL and everybody responded to it, where they didn't even talk about, okay, let's man up and continue the game, which is probably something that would have happened. And they waited to schedule the game. The players were clearly allowed to be upset. I don't know if they had psychologists come to the locker rooms. I'm assuming they did. So in some areas, you're seeing a little bit of a shift, but I still see it in a lot of professions. Lawyers aren't allowed to say that they're stressed. Doctors aren't allowed to say that they're stressed. Because what happens? You come under the gun and people think, oh, well, I don't want the doctor who's anxious.
Is that, because that's well, I mean, I guess, does it depend who you go to? I mean, is it a case of, from that, because we're having that conversation as well, it's just something that I just was recently talking about, was, is it a case of where someone, I was talking about it from a man perspective, we're dealing that with the issues about men opening up. And is it a case where, you need to be able to talk to people in the sense of, if you're seeking advice or you've got an issue, that you have someone, either it might be a dedicated psychiatrist or psychologist within the organization that is there for that recognize that, because I've seen that in some organizations where they'll have a specific person to make sure people stay focused. And I know in high performance organizations, they specifically have that. They recognize that human beings are human beings. We have times where we do need help. And we need a place where we can go to actually to get that help. Do we need more of that? And have that conversation? Say, hey, it's not. You're not an impaired individual. You're actually. This is a sign of strength to go. Hey, I've got an issue. I want to be better. I want to perform better. Is that what we need to be doing?
I think we need to destigmatize it from the top down, because once you see, let's say, once you see a professional, once you see a therapist, once you are on medication, every time you renew your license, you're supposed to disclose that. And then once you disclose it, it's a mark against you. So, you have to always report it. Then they have to do research on it. Then they have to see if you're eligible to maintain your license. So, and I get where it's coming from. You want to keep professionals who really should not have a license. You want to keep them from renewing a license. But I think it also detracts from people who are just maybe a little overwhelmed or suffering some burnout from seeking, the help that they really need.
Yeah. And is it okay? I mean, from that perspective, because I look at it, and maybe I'm, because I think I have that attitude where I just don't care. I'm going to say, I just didn't give a shit. But so I didn't mind asking questions. I didn't mind if someone thought I was an idiot, because it didn't. And I credit my mum for that. As much as I hated it when I was young, she always was very drilled into me from a young age. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, and then as a result, I didn't. I literally don't care what people think. It's none of my business what your opinion is of me. I mean, my friends are my friends, and to me, I find it, and I'm not perfect. I mess up all the time, and our friends say, well, maybe that behavior wasn't the right thing, and I go, yeah, you're probably right. I probably needed to think about that, and through that, I've actually learned to be a better person, because I know long time. An example that I'll give you is I was helping a friend's wedding, and this is a long time ago. And the bride, there was a space at the front of the church for the bride's car to turn up and park. And someone went and parked in that spot that was coming to the wedding. They saw an empty spot, and they parked there. So I've gone over and go, what the hell are you parking there for? Where's the bride going to park it? And just jumped down this person's throat out of good intention, because I was looking after the bride, but I had no idea, in my own head that wasn't, the most appropriate way for dealing with that situation. Obviously, this person was upset. His partner was upset, but being aware, they didn't make it. They went and moved the car, but there was always there. I noticed, obviously there was some tension between us for the rest of the ceremony, and it was, and now I can talk about that and go, so what? I messed up. That was my behavior. That's not who I was as a person. I separate the behavior from the person that I am. I know I'm a good person. Do we need to actually, I find that's how I address those situations where I quite comfortably talk about these kind of things, because one, I don't care, but two, I know that I'm a good person. I don't care what the reaction is. I know that my behavior, that behavior was poor. It was really poor. It was bad. And I recognize at that time I believed I was doing the right thing, but I was clearly wrong. It clearly was not the best way of dealing with things. And do we need, I mean, that's how I deal with that. Is that something that can help other people to deal with that? Or what other ways that, from your experience of being able to let these things out?
Well, I think as we said, if we can't change like the culture and the system, we have to kind of find different ways of managing it. So,
Mm,
let's say you are in a field where, you're not supposed to show anything. Well,
mm,
then you need to find your tribe that's kind of safe, but also really be able to understand for
mm,
yourself. Like you were saying, you had kind of that aha moment,
mm.
especially when other people were like, that maybe wasn't the best way to handle it. People need to really start developing more insight. And I think we talked a little bit about this last time is, not waiting until I'm at a 10 and ready to blow my top before I
Yeah,
talk to somebody.
yeah,
Wait till I'm at a 2 or a 3,
yeah.
where I'm starting to feel anxious or I'm starting to feel depressed, and really doing all of those 5,000 things that are in my toolbox to
Mm.
get myself back to center.
I'm
I
just
think
thinking,
on average we do a terrible job of like self-monitoring. We
yeah.
don't pay ourselves.
Yeah, and because dealing with that stress, as you say, self-monitoring is being aware of where you're at with that. And that was my New Year's resolution. I didn't have any because I had all my goals pretty much set. They hadn't changed, and they were goals or intentions that I was
Mhm.
working towards, and they were bigger things. And I was looking at New Year's and going, well, we should be setting New Year's resolutions, but I've actually got all of the ones that I want as far as I'm working towards.
Mm.
And one thing I had been working on for some time, and it came up in a conversation that reminded me of this was it was listening. And that was something I'd learnt, and I was again shocking listener when I was younger. I knew everything. Someone wasn't going to tell me, it's like tell me, and someone would be telling me something, and I'd be thinking what I'm going to say next and how my opinion was right, and I'd be going on about that. And then I learned that that's not the best approach. And I learned to listen, and that whole point of when someone's talking, you find that you're immediately thinking of what you're going to say next. And I made a conscious effort to not do that, to say, okay, I'm going to really listen to what they're saying, not what I'm going to think of next. And a lot of the times I'll have a notepad or something with me, so if I do think of something, I can just jot that down. If something pops into my head, I'll jot that down, and then I can go back to actively listening, which is, as we're doing here, I've got my little notepad and I'll note things down so I can listen to what you're saying. And that came out in the conversation. And actually, that's my resolution. This year, 2023, I'm going to focus on really, really listening to people, not putting my opinion across. But is that part of how we can deal with stress? Because I know for me, that's had a huge impact on my stress levels, because I'm not trying to put my opinion forward. I'm actually listening to theirs and learning from that. And I found that actually helps me in a number of those situations where someone will say something, you normally get riled up and then react. I'm actually going, what did you say? I'd like to understand that a little bit more. And to me, I found it de-stresses me more. That's what I've noticed with that. Is that something we can do? Is it as simple as that, where we can just listen more?
I think it's listening with the intent to understand, right?
Yeah,
Not listening, as you said, with the intent to respond. So,
yeah,
if you can listen to somebody being judgmental towards you or attacking you and be able to hear it, but keep your boundary up enough so that you're not really taking it in, it then sort of allows you to respond more appropriately, kind
yeah,
of like, well, I'm curious, what makes you think that I'm a pain in the ass? Instead of just responding back with,
yeah,
no, I'm not, yes, you are, or getting involved in sort of a war of words. It's really just being able to hold yourself steady enough to
yeah.
hear the completed thought, because sometimes people just want to vent it out and they just want to be heard.
Yes.
And then responding back with, well, let's talk about it. Have I
Mm,
done something that makes you feel that way, or what makes you feel that way, or what's triggering this?
mm.
That's I think the way to have a productive conversation. But you have to be able to hold yourself and hold that anxiety, that anger, that whatever is coming up for you, and that's really difficult to do.
Yeah, because you mentioned about this internal awareness, you being internally aware. And that's why I
Mhm.
wondered, linking those two together as you were saying that, is it a case of that helps you give internal awareness if you're focused on the other person and listening to what they're saying, and that becomes your priority as opposed to being defensive, so to speak. If someone says, hey, you're behaving like a jerk, you rather than going, oh, I'm not a jerk, and that escalates, and whereas it's going, well, I want to understand, and that becomes a way of just completely diffusing the whole internal feeling. Is that a process that can work?
Yeah, it's a process, but also I find that it takes really quite a while to get there. And I have to say, maybe I have a little bit of an edge, only because in our training, we're always looking for, what they say, the countertransference is, right? Your reaction to your patients.
Yeah.
So how you feel about your patient, what's your internal reaction? If your patient always makes you feel angry, it's quite possible that that's how they make everybody else in the world feel.
Right.
So, I'm always paying attention to my reactions to people, just based on how I was trained, right?
Yeah.
But I found that I was very good at compartmentalizing it, where I could do that really well with my patients. And then in my personal life, I could recognize it, but I would still respond in a more escalated way. And then I realized, hello, if I take one set of skills here and apply it to here, it actually works.
Isn't that the case, though, where we do something very well professionally, but then in other areas of life, we just don't seem to do that?
Right. And so once I really, really started owning it, and really saying it, I found it helps a lot with my kids, where, I might be ready to snap back, like, at something. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I made a mistake with that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to say, well, because I'm mom, or, because I said so. You know what? You're right. Let me think about that. I might have misspoken on that. If I disappointed you, you know what? Let me look at that. I have to look at my part in that. And it really takes down the other person.
Yeah. Is that part of having confidence to be able to do that as well? I mean, being confident enough to say, hey, I acknowledge that there's an issue here or something that we need to do, and having the confidence to say something, because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of managing the stress, and from an employee that I have, and this employee was not, well, from what I saw, I'll talk about it from what I saw first, is the person wasn't performing. They weren't doing their job well. And I know that they could do a good job because they had done a good job. And then that progressively got worse. And I'm thinking, what do I do? How do I manage this? And I'd keep, talking about, as we're having meetings, can you do this and go through that? And we'd be talking about that. And I'm trying to understand, and what do you need to make this happen? And I'll be going through it. What else can I do to support you to make this happen? And it just got worse, and it got worse and worse. And I'm like, what are you doing? And also to part of the the online, because you're not face to face all the time anymore. So I was thinking, oh, what's going on? Are you off doing other work, or are you doing something else? Or is what I was thinking. It's like, well, if you're not doing your job here, then maybe you should go. And that's where I started to head with that. And I was, going, okay, and there's a couple of times there I was going to fire this person. I was like, going to fire, and then they'd do something, and then I give them, and trying to work it out. And then something happened where I can't remember exactly what the trigger was, but something alerted me, and it became a trigger. And I said, this here has caused an embarrassment to me. That's what it was. Yeah, it was they hadn't done something that resulted in me not having information that I needed, which made me, like, I'm there struggling to get it. And I did pull it all together, but it was really challenging for me, made it really, really difficult. And then from that came out that this person was suffering depression, or said they were suffering depression. And it was like, okay. Now, and I just said, right, let's stop everything. You don't, I can't do this now. Tomorrow we're going to have a chat. And then we went through it, and we went through and said, Okay, I just firstly reassure you, you're not getting fired, was my first thing. And then I said, let's talk about this. And we went through a process of going through gratitude every day, and I gave this person some steps to go through, and switched around completely changed the dynamic, went back to being this person. But is it coming back to that courage? Is it a place where we've got to have a safe place, where feel that we've got a safe place where we can open up, and I'm mindful too, not every place is going to be a safe place. Sometimes it's you need to be in a different environment. It's just, if I had been a different person, she would have been better off in a different space. And but is it part of that? And that's different. What I'm getting is it having that courage to say, hey, I'm starting to feel a bit stressed, or this is, and I need to talk about that. Is that what we need to do? Have that courage as well? And how do we develop that?
Ooh, I think that's a good question. I think overall and we don't know what family dynamics or anything that people bring to the workplace. We never know what anybody, grew up with, right?
Correct.
But for the most part, when I hear people who don't, who have a hard time saying I'm wrong or I'm sorry or whatever. A lot of times they grew up in maybe a shame-based environment where, it was not, the behavior was bad, it's your bad.
Yes.
So they may be internalizing, I missed this deadline, I'm terrible, I'm awful.
Are you still there?
Yeah, I lost you for a sec.
It froze for a second. I thought it was my end, but I think it was something in between, because just checking I had an internet problem. But you're saying, they were feeling terrible, feeling awful, rather than because they were not separating the behavior from the person.
Right. And I think it takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, I was wrong, because then it opens up the possibility. You're being vulnerable, right? So it opens up the possibility that somebody is going to jump on that and say, not only are you this, but you're this, and you're this, and you're this. It could really open up a personal attack. So I think it shows, it's like laying all your cards on the table. You're right, I was wrong.
Yeah, that what you're saying there about being vulnerable. It's just noting that but is that, I mean, part of when we look at today's society as well. As soon as you show some vulnerability, especially if you're online on social media, that's why I don't use it. Well, I use it in the sense I post stuff to it. I don't read comments. But is that the case where we go? We've created that by as soon as someone shows some vulnerability, we then drive the knife in, so to speak. Someone's down, let's kick him some more. Have we created that, and do we need to pull back a little bit?
I don't think social media created it. I think social media just provides a very nice environment to keep acting on it. Because this is the kind of thing that you used to see in schoolrooms, when a kid would get in trouble, a lot of times the kids would just all jump on that kid, ha, 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 at the most embarrassing moment, you stutter over your word and every kid in the class laughs at you. Yeah. So I think what social media has really done is created this veil of anonymity where people can, say what they want and hide behind a username that nobody will ever really know where you are, or who you are. And it creates this, like we call this mob mentality, where there's what we call in psychology, like a diffusion of responsibility, almost like where any one person just sort of melts into the crowd, and no one is really taking any responsibility. They just jump one on top of the other.
Yeah. So it's a fundamental thing, because again, I feel maybe I'm weird, but it was, from my perspective, I always had that attitude Like if it's something, and well, I'll give you an example from a work environment. There was a couple of times where with clients that I was working with and managing some projects, when something went wrong, if I said I was going to deliver something by a certain date, and I've had this a number of times, and there was it was a high rise that I was managing. It was a 22-story high rise commercial building they were building, and there was a new toilet block that they wanted put in the and shower area that they wanted to put in the car park. So when the people rode their push bikes in, they could actually, rather than have to walk through the building in the sweaty cycling gear sort of thing, that they could actually get showered and changed before actually coming into the building. So everyone would all feel more comfortable. And we'd agreed to that, and there were certain elements of that I said I'd make happen by a certain time. Things happened. I couldn't deliver it by that time. I was straight on, and my attitude was always, I want to be the person telling you when something goes wrong than someone else finding out. And maybe that deep-seated psychological thing from a kid, when my parents told me if I ever messed up and they found out, they would report me to the police rather than someone else doing it.
Right.
So if you don't, if I do something wrong, tell them first. Maybe
Right.
that's where that came from. But I always found that served me really well, because in that circumstance, something had gone wrong. I couldn't deliver this thing as I'd said I would. I got straight onto the other side and said, hey, this has come up. This is the issue that, I'm not going to be able to deliver it like I said I would. This is what I'm going to do instead, just to let you know, so you know. And I can't think of a time where when I've done that and someone said, they got mad about it. They accepted the situation, said, yeah, okay, we understand. We appreciate you telling me what's going on.
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking about it from that perspective, because I always had that attitude. If you don't like this scenario, then bugger off out of my life, was my attitude. It's like, if you're going to make fun of me, I'm a human being. I made a mistake, and
Mhm.
I'm letting you know I made a mistake. And if you're going to pound on me for that, then I don't want you in my life. Goodbye.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
was the attitude I have, which maybe that's what gave me the courage to say, hey, this is the situation, and not
Right.
get bullied, so to speak, because I just if you didn't like it, you didn't. I really didn't care. If you're going to get mad at me about it, I'm going to try and solve this situation and work through that. And if you don't want to work together, well, then I don't want to work with you. But
Mhm.
that's I guess that's probably a bit rare and a bit, uh, I
Well,
wasn't, I was okay with not fitting in with the group,
but
and
it's
I'm
so
finding another group.
because whenever I talk to people, and whether it's my kids or friends or
Mm,
whatever, I'll say to them, "Well, you came and you went early and you alerted your boss, your teacher, whatever, to this problem. What did your teacher or your boss say?" Well, they said, "Thank you very much. Now we know a way that we can work through it, et cetera, et
mm,
cetera." I said, "Okay, what do you think would happen, or what has happened in the past when you haven't done that?"
mm,
Well, it was much worse. I was also anxious about it. I
yeah,
lost sleep. I was worried about getting found out. I said, so doesn't it make more sense to just come out with it at the very beginning? And so again, that brings us back to the really beginning conversation
yeah,
is, if people can just be honest maybe about what's going on with them at the very beginning,
yeah.
uh, if they're even aware of it, or if other people can intervene, getting the help or the assistance or the heads up early on can prevent future problems. We know that.
Yeah. Do you think, because what you're saying there is the same as my experience, so it seems like, and I'm just wondering, do we focus too much on, yes, there are going to be some people that don't do that, but I find most people, if you go to them and say, hey, I need help, they want to help. I can't, I'm trying to think now as I'm talking of someone that has, when I've asked for help, that has said, no, I can't help. I've had people say, I can't do it now, which is
Mhm.
fair enough. We've all got schedules, but I can't think
Mhm.
of where I've gone to someone and said, can you help me? And they've said, no, piss off.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
and so is it a case of where we over examine, I'm going to give a silly example here, because this is really stupid, but I did it. I was like, how you're driving along and you hear the statement, I always get all the red lights,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah. And so, and me being, I'm probably anally attentive and whatever, I decided to count. So this is really true. So I actually decided to count as I'm driving how many red lights I got and how many green lights I got when I was driving. And when I tallied it up, I actually got way more green lights than I did red lights. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking, well, why is it that the red lights are standing out? And also, well, the red lights are standing out because it's a little bit more frustrating. It's a higher emotion. When I was going through the green lights, I wasn't even really noticing it because it wasn't impeding me on my way. And so I'm just wondering from that perspective, do we highlight where, someone might say, oh, you're an idiot and pound on you, like you said, in the school kid where someone, falls over and everyone laughs and they get pointed out, but that's an isolated thing. But because it has so much more emotional intensity, we exaggerate that to be the whole circumstance when it's not really the case.
Absolutely. And I think those kinds of memories get impressed upon us, and that becomes like our thing, our roadblock, right? So,
Yeah.
so there are people who I work with who, have been great students, amazing, have done everything to a T, and they enter the workforce and they're always afraid that they're going to get in trouble or that their boss is going to yell at them. And, I have to say, look, you're not in the school anymore. And, but that's kind of what's been internalized, right?
Yeah.
And number two, like, I don't know of any boss really, unless it's a totally toxic environment. I don't really know of anybody who deliberately wants to go out of their way to get you in trouble. Like, bosses are very they're not looking to see, can I get this one in trouble? Can I get this one in trouble? Right?
Yeah.
But if
I've had that attitude too. I remember, they're out to get me, but they're busy doing their own thing.
they're
Sorry, I'm
busy doing
interrupting.
thing, but I completely agree. And sometimes, when you go back and you look at it, it's okay, well, this person had parents where they always felt they were going to get in trouble, or they were in school for so long and so used to reporting to teachers or reporting to people that that's just their mindset and they're having a hard time transitioning to like the real world.
Yeah.
So, and I think, like you were saying, the experiences with the strongest emotion, positive or negative, really get imprinted on our memory.
Yeah. And do you think that part of, because when you talk about stress and dealing with stress, that we create some of that because of that impressions that we've, not impressions, that we've imprinted into ourselves, that we're expecting that? Because I remember from I go back to my early corporate days, and this must be something that was, from my childhood that got imprinted. But whenever the boss called me to the office, I would immediately get this fear going, what am I in trouble for? And I made a conscious effort to change that. So I went, okay, because after I was paying attention, many times I got called into the office. It was just to give me an instruction or just to do something, or even sometimes it was to congratulate me. Very rarely did I get called into, not saying I never got in trouble. I did get in trouble sometimes. I wasn't always good. But majority of times it was to give instructions. So I made a conscious effort because I don't like this feeling. I don't want to feel this stress of, I'm going to be in trouble. So I actually consciously said, whenever I got a call, it was like, no, they're just going to give me an instruction. And I made that reframe. I made that choice to do that. But prior to that, I was feeling this stress. Now, I didn't ask anyone for help as to how to do that. I made that choice, but that's part of what we're sharing here, is to give people, different options. Because you said there's 5,000 different ways of dealing with stress before things can explode. How would someone do that? How would, if you're starting to feel stressed? I mean, that was one way I did it. I was feeling stressed. I went, okay, I don't want to feel stressed going to the boss's office because I'm probably not in trouble. And so I said, well, I'm going to take that attitude of that I'm not in trouble. I'm going to go find out what they've got to say because I consider myself to be a good person and diligent worker. How else can we do that? What do we need? Is it that you mentioned self-awareness before. Is it having that self-awareness?
Well, I think that, knowing what your issue is and being able to reframe it, I think is important. But, I'm also thinking of all the people out there who are bosses.
Yes.
What I started to do, because I know that this was my thing too, that I would worry, like, was my boss want me? When I would send an email or ask to speak to somebody, I would add to it, don't worry, nobody's in trouble. This isn't bad news. uh,
Good
just
idea.
people the heads up. So I mean,
Mm,
it can go both ways too. So yes, I think the reframing is super important. That it can be neutral. The boss
mm,
just wants to ask a question. It could be good news. You're getting a raise. It could be bad news. And even if it is bad news, have you handled bad news before?
yeah,
Yes. What have you done before to handle bad news? I've done X, Y, and Z. So
yeah,
at the end of the day, even if it were bad news, you've already
mm,
told me you have 5 different ways of handling bad news,
yeah,
right? Because you don't
yeah,
want people to go in unprepared, because what if it is bad news? It could
yes,
be. Likely
yeah,
it's not, but it could be.
yeah. That's interesting though, because like you say, that there's a whole. 'Cause I guess maybe is it that uncertainty? You don't know what it is that's going on, whether you are in trouble or not in trouble, and you don't want to walk in unprepared, so you're preparing for the worst, because that's the most stressful thing to deal with. Is that more the case, or because that was something I noticed as well through my own life was going, in most circumstances, even when something come out of left field. Generally, I was able to handle it, or if it was something that I wasn't able to deal with at the time, it's not like when you're in school and maybe we're indoctrinated too much in school that you get an exam, you pass or you fail, and that's it. But in life,
Mhm.
is not like that. If you mess up, we've all had that where we've said something. Think about it when we've said something to a significant other that we wish we didn't say. The
Mhm.
relationship in most cases didn't end because you said something.
Right.
You had the time to talk about it and resolve that. Is that something we need to be aware of as well? And oh,
I think the uncertainty piece, I think that's really important. But it sort of makes me think also. I've worked at all different workplaces. Some are healthier than others, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know, in the workplaces that were unhealthier,
mm,
I was always left with the feeling there was a constant anxiety there, like the rug was going to be pulled out from under me at any
yeah,
moment. So
yeah.
another strategy would be is I would just ask whoever was emailing me, okay, is there anything I need to do to prepare for this meeting, or is it just a general check-in?
Mm.
So that was another way to sort of reduce the uncertainty, was just ask.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's one of those things is to ask the question. Is that a fear thing as well? I know from my perspective, it was always, I was fearful of what might happen if I say something, and more often than not, I've found that it's actually been better off to say something than to not say something or to do something. And I think we've all had that experience where you haven't done it and then you've regretted it after and wished you did do something. Um, is it do we need to be able to do that? I mean, do we how do you
I,
take that
I
action? What do you need to do to ask the question when you don't you're worried about asking it? Is it
It's kind of interesting. I don't know if this has to do with like an authority thing, like, oh, the boss, it's the boss. But I've
mm,
seen it with kids and teachers too. Like, my daughter will say something, or I'll talk to a patient, and I'll just be like, okay, well, but why don't you just ask the teacher?
mm.
And they're like, I can't do that. Well, why not?
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. You're not asking anything disrespectful. You're just asking for a clarification. And
Yeah.
sometimes people, I don't, maybe because it's the person is a position of authority, that you can't ask a question because I'm the authority and what I say goes.
Mm.
But you're not questioning their authority. You're just asking for clarification.
Yeah, that's interesting you say about questioning the authority as opposed to asking for clarity. That's an
Right.
interesting point because, yeah, I do wonder about that. Why would someone not ask? If you're uncertain, why would you not ask? And I mean, I guess maybe too, because you have these quotes that say, it's better to not say something and people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and prove it.
And prove them
Um,
right, right.
but that's generally not, and I facetiously at times say, there's no such thing as a stupid question, just stupid people. So I probably contribute to that in a way, but it's I do wonder about that, about not asking questions. It's if you don't know, because I've always, I mean, when I say I've always, after my awareness, I've always asked the question because too often when I was younger, there was many times I asked questions when I probably shouldn't have, um, and then questions that had no basis. I remember I was hanging out with some art students at the time, and I didn't know how to play a guitar, and there was someone there playing guitar. And I honestly asked the question this way with this intention, like I said, "Can you show me how to play the guitar?" As if he could teach me in 2 minutes. It was like, but I literally, that was my thought process. So I was like, I had this, really, I don't know if it was naive or stupidity or whatever it was, where I was going to ask regardless, and maybe it was ignorance. And then I went through a little bit of a phase where I was embarrassed to ask or didn't want to ask. And I regretted that. So I immediately went back to asking questions.
Right.
But is it because, I mean, I link it maybe partly to the school environment where we're taught, if we're asking questions, we're encouraged to ask questions, but it was more that fear of if you get it wrong, you fail. And that, because, if you do an exam and you get it wrong, you fail, is that might be what's stopping people asking questions. And I mean, obviously that causes stress.
I just remember like seeing that bumper sticker that says question authority. And it's
Yeah.
supposed to be like, a rebellion kind of thing, right?
Mm.
So, my thought is that people just don't ask because they don't want it to be viewed as either I'm mouthing back or I'm questioning you and you're the boss. But again, you're not questioning someone's authority. You're looking for clarification. I don't think we teach people the difference.
Yeah.
That anything can be asked in a respectful kind of way.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. It's not what you say, it's how you say it generally. Obviously, there's caveats on that. I'm sure someone will jump on and make a comment. That's fine. But it's like, generally, you can, if you say things certainly with respect, if you ask with respect, most people, again, will want to help, is my experience. I had an experience where I met a gentleman. He was very extremely successful businessman. And I knew him through my stepdaughter's school, and I remember there's a number of times where I for whatever reason, I had some business questions, and I called him up, and I said, "Look, can I buy your coffee? I've got some questions." He didn't. I mean, we knew each other in passing, really, but we didn't know each other that well. And he was like, "Yeah, no problem. Come in, and." He arranged a time with his EA arranged a time for me, and we had a coffee, and he even paid for the coffee. But
Wow.
it was, and we did it, and that was a number of times where I said it was someone extremely. His projects were $100 million projects. That was what his business did. He was very, very wealthy, obviously a busy person. But he made that time because I asked the question, and I'm just wondering what we need to do to help people ask those questions, because for me that reduced a lot of stress. I know up until the point where I asked the question, I felt stressful about it. When I think about my own internal being aware of my own feelings, there's many times when I'm going, I shouldn't do that. And I remember, personally, I had some legal matters that I was dealing with, and I'm like, prepared everything, and then should I file it? Should I file it? And there was that stress. But as soon as I sent it, the stress went. So is it that doing that helps release the stress, do you think? Just doing something?
Once you've actually done it and you can't undo it, your mind shifts into coping. Right?
Okay.
So it goes from
Is
the
that what it was? So it went from stress to coping.
right. It's like not the doing or not doing it. Now it's okay, I've done it. What happens if it goes well? What happens if it goes bad? So your mind automatically shifts to a different kind of focus. But you make a really good point. I mean, there are people that I was just thinking of right now that I would love to just like call them and pick their brain and just ask questions or ask for an interview or do whatever. And I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, I'm like, gosh, why don't I do that? Because if someone called me and wanted to pick my brain about something, I'd be thrilled. I'd be like, I love talking to people. I would love to bounce ideas around. Sharing knowledge is fantastic. So I'm seeing my own roadblocks as we talk about it as well.
Yeah, well, and that's what because for me there was times where it was interesting. I remember when I was in the army, there was a very extremely wealthy business person, and he listed companies he owned, that kind of thing. And I found out where he lived, and he had this massive mansion, which I couldn't. Yeah, I wanted to ask him some questions and I couldn't get in there. So what I did was I wrote a letter and actually physically put it in his mailbox. I got a response. 2 weeks later,
Wow.
I got a response and he answered the questions and things like that. And it was really, and that's why I wonder when we're talking about stress and this stress that we're having, is it too much we're internalizing stuff rather than just, hey, asking the question and having that conversation or just raising it?
Absolutely. I think we get inside our own heads and thinking about it, it's really, okay, what's the worst that can happen? So I
Mm,
drop the letter in the mailbox and I don't hear from the guy. Oh,
yeah,
well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So, you just put it out there. But I think, again, we get paralyzed, in the should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I, without even thinking, what's the
yeah.
risk? What's the risk if you ask somebody out on a date and they say no?
Yeah, they say no. You ask
Say no,
somebody
that's
else.
it. That's it. They screen themselves out and you move on to someone else.
7.7 billion people on the planet, half of them are
Exactly.
the opposite sex. Or, if you're in the same sex, it doesn't matter. There's still half there as well.
But we get caught up in the what ifs too much, and sometimes that paralyzes us. And even that could be, what if I tell my parents I have depression? What if I tell my best friend that I'm really struggling with anxiety? What if I come out to my parents as gay? Like we focus on all of
Mm.
the what ifs, and sometimes they really keep us from doing any kind of action. And when we get stuck in our head, that's where the anxiety and the depression grows.
Yeah. How much of that do you think is actually holding on to, I need this person in my life? Because even in an extreme situation, is you might be your parents and go, well, if they're not going to like that, then maybe they shouldn't be in my life. And I mean, maybe I can say that in the sense of, I now have a very good relationship with both my parents. But there was times there where we didn't agree on things, and I was like, yeah, if you don't like it, tough luck. That was my attitude. I just won't talk to you. I don't want to, and to a degree, I still have that. If there's a topic that they don't agree with me on, then I will not talk to them about that topic. I don't need their approval. I
Right.
don't. And I really, and maybe it's that attitude. I just don't care whether you like it or not. This is what's right for me. And I'm not saying, if you've got a different opinion, you're allowed to have a different opinion. But from my perspective, this is my life, and if you don't like it, well, that's your problem, not my problem. And is
Mhm.
that where we need to be able to go? Well, is it a tribal thing where we need to have a tribe around us to feel secure? Is that getting to that deeper psychological thing, but also
Mhm.
being aware there are other tribes out there?
Well, I think it's an intellectual exercise to be able to say, even though I say it all the time, is look, they've just screened themselves out of your life. They're not the
Mm,
people for you, right? It's intellectually, we can all know that. But then
mm,
to detach emotionally from someone where you've maybe invested time, love,
mm,
memories, you have to actually go through that mourning,
yeah,
especially if they're family members, right?
mm.
And that's the part where there's often the disconnect between the heart and the head.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, and I'm thinking as you're talking about that, about, relationships and that and disconnecting, you can, when you've invested so much emotion in that. I look at that with my, with my ex-wife.
Mhm.
There was lots of really, wonderful times that had to, I mean, obviously you had a lot of connection because if you married someone, there was a connection there. You don't marry someone, well, I would say generally most people don't marry someone because there's not a connection.
Mhm.
Um, and then to let go of that, and how do you deal with that disconnection without, because a lot of times that turns into hate, and you really hate the person, but you really love that person. How does that work? So from my perspective, it was like, okay, just letting go of that and addressing that. Well, yeah, there was that connection there where there was areas where you didn't connect, and that's why we didn't work. That's on both sides, and you can't blame. And I love my mum. She gave me so many good little nuggets of wisdom. That she said she always said it takes two to tango. There's no point blaming one person in an argument. There's both people. You can't argue if one person's not there. Was that? But how do we disconnect that emotion? Is that, do we need to go, how do we reconcile that loss? Is it just accepting that's okay, that to have that disconnection in your life? Or
Yeah, I think recognizing that there's the disconnection and also allowing yourself to know that, okay, even though there were some negative things about the relationship, it didn't work out, that doesn't mean that the positives weren't there and that I can't honor the positives as well.
yeah.
And that can often be the struggle for someone who is leaving a relationship, or that a complicated relationship with parents who passed away. It's, how do I reconcile all of this, that I know they weren't good for me, but there were good times and I still have an attachment to those good times.
Because that creates stress, and that's what we're talking about, is how do we deal with that stress? And it can be really difficult to let go in some areas where you've been that close. Obviously, with your parents, you're very close. If you're having an intimate relationship with someone, that there's a very a lot of closeness there as well. Having that stress of letting go and moving on. Is that, I'm just trying to, as I'm talking about that, going, well, how does someone do that? How do we de-stress in those situations? Is it finding another group to talk about with, or just finding your own space? It might be a case of, you go for a run on the beach, those kind of things. Or
It's a little bit of everything. I think it's, doing the things that you need to do to whatever your self-care is, running on the beach, journaling, therapy, but also finding the people who will allow you to understand that you can have the positive with the negative. A lot of times people will say, well, they were bad to you. You don't even need to think about them anymore. Yeah, but we still had these great experiences and we had kids together or whatever. So it couldn't have been all bad, right?
Yeah.
So it's finding those people who will allow you to experience the full story.
Yeah, because and as you're talking, I always keep coming back to what you said earlier about self-awareness, and this is because there's no right way of doing it. It's what works for you. It's finding that space of, how do you de-stress? How do you let that pressure out? And I think, from my experience, one of the things I used to do, and because they talk about hitting sports being good for de-stressing, golf, tennis, those kind of things, because you're actually hitting something, and as a result, that lets things out. And I know there was a period in my life where I was doing that, not consciously thinking about it, but I played a bit of golf, and as a result of that, I don't know whether it took stress and moved it somewhere else, because I hit the ball somewhere ridiculous and be like, oh. And so that maybe it was just replacing the stress with something else. But it's one of those things where we have to find, how do we become aware ourselves and take that time. Is that time just having that self time? Because sometimes we don't like being alone either. That can be, I know people that I've talked to.
Well, that's a lot of times because we've run away from our emotions.
Yeah. Because I was wondering about that. Do you need to have, is it about being comfortable being alone? I know from my point, my journey, certainly being very comfortable with myself, and I can be alone and I'm not lonely. They're two different things. And is that what we need to do with that self-awareness that you're talking about, being comfortable with yourself as you are?
Sure, being able to be alone with yourself enough to know your own thoughts and to know your own feelings, that can be scary for a lot of people. We push down on a daily basis things that we don't want to remember, things that we don't want to think about, the mortgage, the kids, the problems, whatever. But the only way to get through it is really to go through it. But that's a practice. I wouldn't say you do all of it at once, but spend 10 minutes a day by yourself and really learn to tolerate being by yourself and see what comes up.
Everyday things do cause us stress, like having money to pay the mortgage. Is it to de-stress from that worry? Is it being able to acknowledge that this is, something that I can deal with, and I need to just, if I have a problem, that I need to ask someone to help.
I read in a book, I wish I could remember what book it was, but it was a really great strategy. And it was, when you're worried about so many future things like the mortgage, money, groceries, is to really ask yourself in the moment, are my bills paid for right now? Right in this moment, is everything paid up?
Yeah.
Yes, everything is paid up. So I don't have to worry any more than right now. Don't think next month. Don't think next year. When you wake up tomorrow, what needs to get paid? Can I pay it today? Is it paid? Yes. Don't worry about tomorrow. Really focus in the right now, because we do have a tendency to get too far in advance. And that's what overwhelms us, is I'm okay for now, but 3 months from now, I may be in trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard something similar. It's like, what if we worry about what's in the past, and we was it stress about what's happened worry about what's in the past, and worry about what's in the future. They use two different terms. I can't remember what it was. One was past, one was future, but it all linked to worrying about things. But if you focus on now, then you're not going to be worried. So it kind of links to the same thing. I'll look up that quote later. But is there anything you can do to encourage yourself to focus on the now as opposed to worrying about the future?
I think just bringing yourself again back into the moment and saying, okay, is there anything immediately that I have to do right now? No, then good. I'm going to do something pleasurable.
Yeah.
Make myself feel good. Get myself out of that worry mindset. Listen to music. Call a friend. Paint a picture. Try to disconnect from the worry so that the feedback loop doesn't continue. And a lot of times that means physically, like moving to a different location. So you really want to change like the neurons that are firing, change the area of the house. If you always worry in your bed, get up out of bed and go do something else.
It sounds like, coming back to what you mentioned before, being very aware of your own internal feelings. And then what you're saying is, if I'm hearing correctly, is creating a new habit, just recognizing this is it and just doing something different.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know you've got to run, so we've probably taken a little bit longer than you expected. I do appreciate the extra time. Thank you very much, Laura. It's been a pleasure chatting about how to de-stress.
Oh, always fun. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Looking forward to catching up again soon.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.